If you do have to leave, feel free to, and hopefully, I would say by Monday, the recording would be put on our website, which we can send the link around to the website where it'll be. Okay. I'm going to let me know if you guys can see my screen out there. Can everybody see that? Yeah, okay.
Well, they're muted, so.
Yeah.
No. Okay.
Let's try this again. Okay, well, I'm failing miserably today. So I take it you heard nothing that I just said. So sorry. Instead of share, I hit mute. Okay, now we can hear. Perfect. So let me go back to the screen. Now everyone can see this screen. So this first page is just the cover page. For this section would be for your facility information, the name. The primary SWPPP contact can go here. And then we're asking this time around for an on-site contact. And that is because historically, some of the contacts have been out of state. And when we reach out for site inspections, the information doesn't get relayed to the facility level sometimes. So we just want to make sure we know who to contact, who we're going to reach, who's in the state and available to meet us. And then the SWPPP preparation date, that can be ever changing if it was revised at all throughout the process. So this first section is just asking the basic information, your facility name, this street location. We are really looking for the physical address instead of like Route 100. It's close to the exact location as you can get. If there is no E911 address, some people have put like across the street from Cold Hollow Cider Mill, so that if you were going there without coordinates or something, you would have a general idea of where you were going. The city and the zip code, we have to track for EPA. This previous permit number, most people have this already. You can find it via our website, or I can give it to you if you don't have that. You also should need to know this for your notice of intent as well. So it's a good number to have. And then this section is a primary SIC code. So what we're looking for here is the primary activity at the site. There shouldn't be multiple SIC codes here. if you do two different kinds of gravel extraction, or you do gravel extraction and rock extraction, you just put whichever activity is your primary one here. And then any co-located or secondary SIC codes would be in this section. This question should match what you've indicated as your primary SIC code on your application as well. Your NOI asked that question. Some facilities complete their SWPPP because they want to keep their permit active for at a time when they want to regain their industrial activities. So that's really what this question is asking, is if you're inactive and unstaffed. The coordinates can be found. We're really looking for like the center of your project to put in here. And those can be found, if you don't have them, on like Google, or the Atlas has a great tool to find your coordinates. We can go over that if anyone needs that. This question just about facility if you're a federal operator, yes or no, and it provides the definition. If you were a federal operator, you wouldn't be eligible for coverage under the state general permit, because we can't permit federal facilities. So that question is typically no. And then this question is just asking what your exposed industrial area is to the nearest quarter acre, just to get a generalized idea of your site. And then this next section is all about if you discharge into an MS4. That information can be found on the Atlas. There's MS4s like the city of Burlington, UVM, city of Rutland, a certain municipal stormwater have their own stormwater section that they've been designated an MS4. So that's what this is asking for, and you can find that on the map. Again, we can go over that if need be on the Atlas. This question gets missed a lot because I think it seems like it's related to this previous question, but it's not. So this is asking for the name and classes of any discharges to surface water that may receive stormwater from your facility. You're also required to tell us that on the notice of intent. So those two sections should match. So, unnamed tributary to Winooski River, wetlands leading to Winooski River, whatever it shows on whichever mapping feature that you use of the first named water of the state that would receive your discharge if one were to occur. And then the next question is about discharges to impaired waters. Again, that can be found on the Atlas, and I have that link open for at the end, or maybe after the section, we can look at it so you can see the layers to turn on, but you can find that on the Atlas as well. If it does, you answer the questions below, which are also found on the Atlas. But if it doesn't, you would click no. And then what I've been asking people is anything that doesn't apply to the site is, instead of leaving it blank, just put NA there, just so that we know that you looked at it and that it doesn't apply to the facility, because that will prevent some comments coming of, hey, you left this blank. Did you review it?
Well, actually, got a question here. We can figure out how to let this gentleman talk here.
in the comments.
You've got his hand raised here.
Greg, if you unmute yourself, you can go ahead.
Oh, there you go.
Is it not letting him unmute?
I think you're gonna have to unmute him, Ashley.
All right.
You've got control of it. Craig, is there any chance you can type your question in the chat while we try to figure out the unmute? Thank you.
I unmuted you.
You did.
Oh, I clicked it.
You keep going, Ashley. We'll figure it out.
Okay.
Okay, it says, so every space that is not used, we need to type NA.
Yeah, that is what I have been asking people to do because it's also some spaces that are blank apply to every site, but they're left blank. And so it's just a good indicator to us when there are ones that may not apply to the sites that you've looked at it and it doesn't apply to the site. This next question only applies to certain sectors. So I think a lot of people here today either are in mineral mining or wood, like timber products. So those would be if you have mine dewatering or if you have wet decking and they discharge. There is a part of the permit that asks that. And in addition to that, on the NOI, when you fill it out, it asks you certain questions like, do you have mine dewatering discharges, yes or no? And if you said yes to that, that is something that triggers effluent limit guidelines in the permit, which are separate reporting and monitoring guidelines. So this question is really facility specific. So if you have it, you would say which guidelines apply, which is, either TSS, pH, woody debris. Those are all found in the permit in the sector specific requirements, which I've been sending to people, but you can get them on our website and I can show you how as well. And then this question just asks what activity triggers it. So if you're a mining operation and you have dewatering, you would say mine dewatering discharges. Or if you're a timber facility and you have wet decking discharges, you'd say discharges from wet decking or wetting of logs. Otherwise, you would say no and then just put the NAs to indicate that they don't apply to you. This next section is just a summary of what happens at your site. Sometimes we see mineral mining, but we really kind of want to know what is included in that. Screening, excavating, fueling, vehicle washing, maintenance, things like that. Like anything that you do at your site that's either indoors or outdoors with specifications about where they're done. We need to see here just so we can get, again, it's a general understanding for us of what happens at your site, as well as these are public records, anyone who looks at them, and for the future use of the facility for training purposes and things like that. It helps to really be as specific as possible. And I'll say I recognize that some of the boxes are not suitable. And if you ever run into a situation where you don't have enough room in a given section, reach out to me. I have some forms that we've already completed that are additional sections for these that we can send, or we can work out a plan to modify the SWIP to meet the facility's needs. So buildings and what they're used for, if you have a working trailer there that you keep your paperwork in, or that's used for the restrooms, things like that, you can put them there. Some sites have none, so you can put none, whatever the buildings are. And if there's a bunch of buildings, people have said, 4 office buildings, 2 woodsheds, 1 desk. You don't have to list them each individually because there's really not that much space. And we do ask this question later on for a more in-depth detail of the buildings. Hours of operation, we're just looking for, Monday through Friday, Monday through Saturday, 7 a.m. to 5:30 to get a general idea of when someone is typically there. It's not, not held, but we're gonna always show up in those hours, so we need it, but it's just a generalized hours of operation. This section here is if you have an Act 250 permit and there's specific guidelines of when you can't operate. I know that sometimes Act 250 doesn't allow you to operate on federal holidays or before the hours of 6 a.m. or after the hours of 10 p.m., things like that. Or there may be site-specific requirements through Act 250. We just want to know that here. And then, so seasons are times when the facility is typically inactive and unstaffed. A lot of times, for instance, gravel pits are closed from November to March and they reopen in April. So we, instead of saying like winter, giving like the more specific months of when the facility is closed typically. It doesn't have to be, if you say November, that doesn't mean we expect you to be closed in November. It's just a typical schedule, recognizing that Vermont weather changes every single day. Number and types of vehicles. So this is where you would put, if you have 4 bulldozers, a screener, a wood chipper, whatever types of vehicles, it should really say vehicles and equipment that are on the site that you use in your industrial activity. You don't necessarily have to say there's 7 employee cars. It's more looking for information on industrial type equipment and vehicles. And so this next section also gets missed a lot. This information should already be on your NOI because the notice of intent requires you to list out all your outfalls with their coordinates, receiving waters. So this table should match what you've said in your notice of intent. So you number the outfalls. They don't have to go 1 to 5. They can be whatever the facility chooses to name it. The coordinates, what's that facility's receiving water. And then if this facility has multiple SIC codes, what SICs have a potential to discharge at that outfall. Sometimes it's all of them. Sometimes there's different activities that happen at different locations of the facility. So we're just looking for whatever SICs are associated with that outfall. And there's plenty of space there. All right, so that is section 1.1. Does anybody have any questions before we move to 1.2? And if you do, and you can't unmute, I can try to unmute you.
Or they could type into.
Or you can type into the chat.
That's what you make.
Okay. If you do, feel free to put them and we can come back to it at a later date. Later time. So 1.2 is pretty much just contact information. So the facility operator contact, and the facility owner. Sometimes these are the same, sometimes they're different. Sometimes someone owns the facility, the land, but it's operated by someone else. So that's just, we're just looking for the contact information for the operator and owners. And then the primary contact that you would like us to reach out to for the site and the SWIP goes in this next section. And then again, we're looking for the contact for who's going to be on site that we could just call up and say, hey, we're 5 minutes away. Is anyone there for a site inspection? This information, a lot of this information may be the same. It may be the same person, and that's okay. So the person is responsible for conducting inspections. So the MSGP has visual inspections. It has quarterly or monthly inspections depending on your sector. And so who is responsible for those? And then a backup person as well, in case that person's not available. And then the next questions are about monitoring. So some facilities have monitoring requirements, some do not. If you don't have it, you could put not applicable. It's not required. But if it is, who's going to do that? Sometimes people use engineers to do that. So you could put their information in these sections if you hire an engineer to do your monitoring. Any questions about contacts? This next section, a bit repetitive, I understand that, is asking who the pollution prevention team is. So if you have 5 people who work at the facility and they all have different roles in management of not only the SWIP, but just the facility and different job duties, we want to know who's there and what they're doing at the facility. Having something that says like SWIP coordinator and management of the SWIP, it doesn't really tell us a lot. So really we're looking for, you know, Ashley Carver, operator, you know, responsible for updating the SWIP, doing inspections, training new staff, etc. Just generalized responsibilities for all the individuals who play a role in the facility. Any questions about the SWIP team? So this next section is the site description. So this instruction box has a lot of examples of things that we may be looking for in the next section. So I think, you know, reading through this and seeing the areas that industrial activities consist of, which there's more, but this is just like a shortened list. And then industrial activities that may occur at any of the areas. It's not an exhaustive list. It's just a generalized list of activities that could occur at industrial areas. So this kind of gives you a cheat sheet to look at and say, do we do any of these things? If so, we're going to put them in the tables below. There's also information in the general permit and the sector specific information about activities on the site for specified activities. So that's where you would put here. So you would say, you know, fueling activities and, you know, fueling of bulldozers as needed, whatever the industrial activities are here, mining, screening, access roads, fueling, vehicle washing. All those things are separate industrial activities. Or the areas like the pit floor, the access road, etc. Those are all things that we're looking for, and what, just like a brief description of what happens in that area or what that industrial activity includes. Any questions on the site description? This next section is one that's also missed. So the general location map, we have requirements of what the map needs to show. There's a tool that you can use that I've been sending to people, and again, I meant to send these links ahead of time, and apparently I sent a blank update, but I don't know, can you guys see this map? Yeah. Okay, so this, again, I'll send this, but this is our location map generator. So you can put any address in. I always use where we work, and it fills it in for you. So I'm gonna say 1 National Life Drive, and it's gonna load the map, and it has a lot of things. I can be a little overwhelming, but that's all you have to do. And then do I see the generate button?
Yes, the printer button.
Oh, it's a little hidden. So there's this button here that says print map. And there are instructions on the cover page, but I use it so much that I told it not to ask me again. So I can't show those, but the opening page tells you these instructions. It tells you to type in the permit number and then hit print map and wait, because it does take a little while. So you'll hit print map, hit print, and then as soon as it prints in this results, you'll see a number 1, and then you can save it and upload it with your application. I can come back to it because I think it sometimes can take up to 3 to 5 minutes to load a result, and so I don't want to have everyone have to stare at it working, but we can come back to this one when it has a result so you can see what it says. So this is a tool that we developed for the construction permit, but then are using also for the multi-sector. So all you have to do is put your address in, hit print, and it's going to produce a map that has everything that we require on it. So you don't have to worry about figuring out what layers you need or anything like that anymore. This just does it all for you.
No, actually, you might want to tell them the distinction. You're talking about location map.
Yeah, I'm talking about the location map right now. So this is, the location map generator, and it is on our website. I'm happy to share it with everyone afterwards as well, because like I said, I meant to share all these links in ahead of time, but it didn't work. So that's for this first one, this general location map. And then the site map is the one that requires more detail that you can't get from a generalized map like that. So you'll notice the SWPPP has these checkboxes. So the intent of the checkboxes is as you prepare your site map, and it doesn't have to be a professionally developed one. It can be a hand-drawn map. It can be Google Earth, Google Maps with like shapes drawn in. As long as it meets the requirements, it doesn't matter what it looks like or how it's made. So it's just, you have to go through this list and make sure that everything's there. So, boundaries, significant impervious areas, the direction of the stormwater flow, which really helps us determine making sure that all the outfalls are properly identified, stormwater controls, etc. There's a bunch of things on here. Some things may not apply to the site, and that's okay. Like if there's nothing where a leak has occurred, you wouldn't have to do that because you have nothing to say there. But location of all stormwater monitoring points we want to know so we can visualize where you're monitoring. And it's also, think about it as it's helping, you as a facility to know where all your monitoring points are as well. So as you go through this list, checking off the things that as you put them on the map and recognizing that some things don't apply. Not everybody has fueling areas or maintenance and cleaning areas, but a lot of the things up here are things that everyone should have, like the direction of the stormwater flows, the boundaries, the potential pollutant sources, and your stormwater monitoring points. So this is something I know that has also given people a little bit of pause. So also willing to work with people to help develop out those with the tools that you may have access to. But we need to be able to see the site as a whole and everything. If there's a crusher, where's the crusher located? If it's a large gravel pit with different phases, where the phases are, things like that. Anyone have, let's see if this loaded first. Okay, it did. So then for the location map, going backwards, you'll see this results. It has a 1. So then we're going to click on it and it says stormwater permit map. Click on that one. And it just automatically opens for you and shows you everything that we need. So, this is National Life. There's some wetlands here. There's a bunch of things that we look for here at National Life. So you would save this to your computer and send it along. Any questions about location maps and site plans? I know that's a lot to take in. All right. And these can be different attachments. You don't have to insert them into the SWP, especially if there's like a larger plan. Sometimes it messes up the formatting, so they can be separate attachments. Attachment A and B that are saved separately than the SWP. So this next section is asking about potential pollutant sources. And I do, again, just want to call out that a lot of the sections have these gray boxes with instructions that have some ideas in it and some areas that we would typically see. So you're welcome to look at this. This says they're include but are not limited to material handling equipment or activities, industrial material, raw material, etc. So like all this stuff is mentioned here. But facilities have depends on your facility. So you may have things that are not included in there that you can put in this table. With that, also, another link that I'll send around is EPA has these amazing fact sheets. So they've developed these fact sheets for every sector that outlines a lot of those industrial activities and their potential pollutant sources. So depending on where you are, so say we go to, we'll use one that we haven't talked about. Say we go to salvage yards it tells you a little bit about why EPA and the state of Vermont regulate salvage yards, what types of facilities require it. So it tells you, you also can get an idea if you're in the right sector. It talks about, you know, this is the table that talks about, so with vehicle dismantling, these are the pollutant sources that they've identified, and the pollutants, used auto parts, you know, it just lists a lot of those things that we're looking for, and it also gives you an idea of things that maybe you didn't consider before, because it's just your everyday, you're just used to it. So you can use EPA's fact sheets for help with that, and they have every single sector is the same, and they are targeted towards those specific sectors. I use them often. I think they're very valuable. So you would say that here, you know, you would say, you know, if you had an access road for a gravel pit, you could say the access road and TSS, oil grease is some of your pollutants that could be associated with that.
Actually, I dropped it in the chat if somebody wants to look at it while we're doing this.
Okay, what?
The EPA fact sheets.
Oh, do you have a sector?
No, I dropped the whole,
Okay, thank you. Yes. Well, that's a good idea. We could drop
I've been doing them.
all of the ones in the chat.
I've been doing location map and fact sheets are so far.
That's fabulous. Okay. These next two questions are very sector specific. So if you're not in airport transportation or metal mining, you would just say there should be NA. I fully recognize that, but you can just say no if you're not those sectors because they don't apply to you. So, but if you were a sector S on air transportation, you would answer this question. And if you're a sector J, metal mining, you would answer this question. But those are not typical sectors. So leaks and spills, this is just areas where leaks and spills could occur on your site. So if you have a maintenance garage, I've seen people say, you know, in the garage, which is fully enclosed and no discharge points because it's enclosed, which is fine. But you know your site the best. So any areas that spills could occur, like the access road, you know, and excess materials, or there's leaking of the trucks, even though that's kind of outside the facility's control, but things like that is what we are looking for here. And then the next question asks if there's been any leaks or spills and where they went if they did occur. I think really maybe the time frame in the last 5 years, 5 to 10 years. We don't need to know that a spill happened in 1986. Any questions on spills? Okay. This next section gets, I think there's a little bit of confusion about this next section. This section is, so the permit requires facilities to do an evaluation for unauthorized stormwater discharges. So the applications that I've reviewed, I've sent, and it's very long, I've sent the actual language from the permit that lists out the allowable non-stormwater discharges, like air conditioning, condensate, occasional hydrant flushings, things like that. There's a list of probably 25, which I printed out. And I can send that place in the permit to people. Like potable water, line flushing, landscape watering, pavement wash waters with no detergents, routine external building wash downs. Those are all allowable non-stormwater discharges, which on the notice of intent, the NOI that you completed as well, it asks you if you have any of those. So you would have already answered if you have allowable. This one is asking about non-allowable stormwater discharges. So anything that's not listed as an allowable non-stormwater discharge is not allowable. So for instance, vehicle wash water cannot be discharged from the site and reach a water of the state. So if the facility was doing that, they would say that they found it and they eliminated it. So that's essentially what this question is asking. It's saying, when did you do it? The method used is typically a visual inspection to see if there's any non-stormwater discharges that are not allowable at the site. If there were, or you would list the discharge points or drainage points where you observe. So whichever ones you've listed above need to be observed. And then any actions taken. If nothing was found, you just say none needed or none required, whatever you want to say. But if you found something, you would just say it there and how you eliminated it, that discharge. This question is also on the notice of intent, and so those answers should match. I recognize that the weather didn't necessarily permit it at the time that some of these were submitted. So if the weather does not permit, you can say that. You can just say that it wasn't done because of weather. And then on the annual inspection report that we're developing for the end of this calendar year, we will ask that question at that time. So it's okay if you didn't do it, but you have to tell us why. And not because in a lot of them we're not required to, or we did it as part of, we do it every quarter as a part of our sampling. This is kind of asking for that one evaluation. Does anyone have any questions about the evaluation of non-stormwater discharges?
Got a question here. The other, Craig, are you able to type in the chat? Because we haven't been able to get, actually, are you able to get from their speaker on, their mic on?
I think I accidentally, when you mute all, think that you potentially ruin. Let's see, Craig, let me find you and see if I can unmute you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, look at that.
Okay. Yeah, I think on our end, you just have to go up to the top of the screen and click on microphone. That's what I did, if you can hear me. Yeah. Okay, so what would be helpful for me is what is I'm having trouble understanding what is the difference of the definitions of stormwater and runoff and dewatering. I mean, my understanding is that we're needing to submit this permit application because we're dewatering a quarry. But how is that stormwater, or stormwater something different? I'm just struggling with the basic definitions of, what's a discharge versus runoff and all that. If you could clarify that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we do have questions about that later on, but I think what you're speaking to is some of our email correspondence. So sites that are Sector J mineral processing facilities sometimes require mine dewatering. Some sites have what is called process water in their mine dewatering. That's a determination that comes from the wastewater program, and the stormwater program can't permit that discharge because if there's a commingling of process water and stormwater, it becomes processed water. So that's something like I think you and I could, unless other people have questions about, but it's not something that I can easily define or answer because.
Right. But like in our situation, we have no processing, no mill or anything like that at the site. We're just pumping out very clear, essentially rainwater that collects at the bottom of our quarry. And so I just didn't know, like, I guess where we're pumping that out to our property, where it leaves our property, that's an outfall, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so is that stormwater or is that just dewatering water?
Well, it sounds like you're dewatering stormwater.
Dewatering stormwater.
Yeah,
Okay.
some facilities, they like when they're wetting rocks or stone, they're maybe needing to get rid of some of that water and some situations that may be defined as processed water, but it's really facility based and a determination that we have to make individually, not as a whole. But if you don't do anything on the site that classifies as processed or processed water, then it would, as long as it is stormwater, then that would be your outfall, one of your outfalls.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah,
thank
I'm
you.
happy to answer questions. I know what you're talking about. I'm happy to, we can try to figure it out outside of this meeting too, for your site in particular.
But so that like the basic purpose of this, what we're applying for in this permit is permission to dewater our quarry and discharge it, off our property, I guess, right? Is that the only thing we're applying for, I guess?
It depends on the site. That some sites have outfalls that are not mine dewatering. They, discharges from the access road, from other parts of the site. Mine dewatering is just one aspect of an allowable discharge under non-stormwater discharge, or stormwater discharge under the permit.
Okay.
Do we have to get a permit for just rainwater running off of our property?
Yeah, this is a stormwater discharge permit for industrial sites.
So if rainwater collects on our property in one location, pulls up and runs off onto our neighbor's property, would that be an outfall?
Again, without seeing a site map or something like that, it's hard to tell. There's many factors that go into that. So if you have site specific questions, I'm happy to, go over that with you outside of this.
Yeah.
Okay.
To try and answer your question though, it sounds like you just got general questions, right? So stormwater is going to be rain or precipitation, right? That hits an industrial activity, right? So if your industrial activity is mining, whether it be rock, sand, dimensional stone, right? If rainwater comes into contact with that becomes stormwater in contact with an industrial activity, right? So then we look at where's the area for potential discharge, right? It sounds like yours, it may fill up the pit that you're working in currently, and you have to pump it out occasionally to do work in there.
Right.
So that would be the mine dewatering portion of it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Is there any more questions about the non-stormwater discharges? This next section, 2.4, is just about salt storage, containing salt for de-icing or other commercial uses. And then it notes that additional questions about salt storage are going to be asked later in the SWPPP template. So this is just asking you for the locations of storage files containing salt. If you have none, you just say not applicable, none. If you do, you talk about those locations. Any questions about salt storage? So this next section, sampling data, is just, we recognize that a lot of sites have submitted DMRs to us with their sampling results as required through their permit. This section is essentially just asking for a summary of the data that you have. So if in 2015, in Q1, you were required to test for TSS and you got a result of 3 milligrams per liter, you would just say that here, 2011, 2012, whatever, whatever data you have available, this is a summary form. I'm asking people not to refer to any other document because that is the intention of this section, is to have it right here to summarize and see the data as a whole. Some people don't have data, and that's fine. You could say why you don't have data to give in this section. Any questions about sampling data? This next section is about stormwater controls. So each site should have some sort of control measure, good housekeeping, BMPs, to help control stormwater leaving the site, to be able to either meet your effluent limits or your discharge monitoring reports, so that you're not discharging large amounts of TSS or nitrate plus nitrite, any of those parameters that are outlined in your permit. This section is essentially just asking what control measures you have to help protect the water quality of your receiving water. And then it just, some of these we've made a checklist instead of asking some of the questions, which I think is helpful for the check boxes. The first question is asking any structural practice or control that you have to minimize exposure of these areas to rain, snow, or snow melt, or snow water, or stormwater, sorry. And then describe the control practices and where it's being implemented. So a lot of sites have a perimeter berm, they have stormwater ponds or swales, catch basins, things like that, that help control their stormwater. And so this would be the place to say it. Not everyone does, sometimes it's not needed. And then the question, just where is it being implemented on your site? And then this next section, instead of, we used to just ask these questions in a different way. But this time we just made a checklist. So it just says, unless it's not feasible, these are what you should try to implement at your site, and then check the boxes that you are. Some of them might not apply to the site because you don't have vehicles to drain. So you can just check what you do have or what you would do. And then if there's anything that, if nothing above is feasible or some things aren't feasible, is there anything else that you're doing for an alternate practice at the site? You can put it in this section. Any questions about those two sections? Because those are big sections. This next section is asking about good housekeeping practices, so I kind of think about it as what I do at my house to keep it clean, you know, to manageable. So things like if you have an access road or a place where dust collects, sweeping is a good housekeeping practice. Storing hazardous materials in an airtight container or preferably under cover. Checking, you know, getting your trash, if you have a dumpster, emptied at a regular interval and keeping it covered at all times. Cleaning up spills immediately. Equipment management in where you're performing equipment maintenance, either inside when practical, off-site, or what if you have to perform your maintenance on-site, what practices are you putting in place to prevent leaks and spills onto the ground? Employee training can go there because making sure that employees are properly trained is very important. Having spill kits when available. Those are just some ideas of good housekeeping practices to put in there, but they can be anything that you do at your site that you feel keeps the site neat and orderly.
Actually, it might be a good time to bring them back to the industrial fact sheets as well. They list stuff in there as far as good housekeeping practices.
Yeah, EPA has, let's see. That's one. Trying to think of one we haven't done that maybe someone is here for. Well, let's go back to sector A. EPA's mostly has BMPs, but that also could mirror as good housekeeping. They just have like a section here for each one that they talk about good housekeeping and that they're, you know, cost-effective ways to maintain a clean and orderly facility. And then for sector A, which is, you know, timber products, they say limiting the discharge of woody debris, cleaning up airborne dust, and chemical management. So those are 3 good housekeepings that EPA lists, as well as there are some in the, you know, in the paragraph. So this is why EPA's fact sheets are really valuable in every area of this SWPPP template. Yeah, they also say training employees, trash container storage areas, loading docks. And then, so this tool that EPA has put together will help with that section as well. Does anyone have any questions about good housekeeping? Within the same section, we ask about the waste pickup schedule. Some places don't have it, so again, you can say that you don't have it, but if Casella comes every week to pick up your dumpster or your trash, you can put it here. If you have drums and tanks or containers, what's your schedule for inspecting them for leaks? And if you don't have any, you just add that there. And then another checklist, just unless it's not applicable to your facility, you must implement these practices. A lot of people, this last one is specific to plastic material handling. Most people say no to this, so they don't check it and they just say, we don't handle plastic materials. But keeping dumpster lids closed, storing materials in appropriate containers, sweeping at regular intervals, and minimizing, waste and garbage from being discharged. This next section is about maintenance. This, one section is about your control measures, which you may have set up top. You have a berm around your site. What's your maintenance procedure for keeping it intact and how often? You have swales, you line them with stone, you have check dams, things like that. Where on your site it's happening, how are you keeping it maintained, and how often to make sure. And this first section is just about control measures. The next page is about vehicle and equipment maintenance. So industrial equipment, a lot of that, you refer back to what you've listed above for what equipment you have on the site. And you list it out here, the name, where on the site typically is, what the maintenance procedure, and the schedule. One thing that I noticed is some facilities only have maybe equipment on site for 3 weeks out of the year. There's still equipment on site for those 3 weeks. So we would want to know what equipment is on site when the site is active, where it's stored, how it's maintained, still in their schedule and frequency. You can put in here only on site for 3 weeks a year and then stored off site. You could put those dopes in, but even if it's not stored on site forever, if it's on site and then part of the industrial activity, this is the space to talk about all the equipment. Any questions on the sections above about the maintenance? And then this next section is just tells you, asks if you have any additional preventative procedures that you do here, any backup practices, like if the berm failed, is there backup practice in place for that failure? Or any upgrades that you've made because of a previous failure, like the berm blew out, so you reinforced it with X, Y, and Z. You could put that here. This section is just, if you find your control measure needs to be maintained, these are things you're required to do for everybody. Any questions about maintenance? So this next section, not everyone's going to have something here. It's mainly if you have like earth disturbance that requires an EPSC plan, like if you're opening new earth, removing overburden from a gravel pit, what measures are you taking to stabilize the soils and minimize erosion? Some people who have maybe like a working station for log yards or salvage yards have been putting how they manage their working areas as well. So anything that you want to tell us about how you minimize erosion if needed on your site. And then this section asks about how you manage your stormwater on the site. So just describe any controls used to divert, infiltrate, or reuse or contain or otherwise reduce stormwater. So this is where if you have check dams, if you have a stormwater pond that collects all of the stormwater from your site and only outfalls when it's full, those are all things that you would put here and where on the site that control is located. Some people have check dams throughout their access road to slow down any runoff going down the access road because they're typically pretty steep. So this would be your place to tell us what you're doing. And then this is just a summary of utilizing the practices above, how is stormwater managed throughout the site. Even if you don't have installed practices, what does the site do to manage stormwater? Does it divert water to infiltrate on a grassy surface? What's the site doing just to minimize and control their stormwater? Any questions about stormwater management? So this next section is just about salt. So if the site doesn't have it, you just say NA. But if you do have it, how do you maintain the salt? Most people store it under cover. So they put that here, and then how the salt piles are managed if they apply to the site. Any questions about salt management? And then dust generation and vehicle tracking. This is just where you say, like, it especially applies to sites that have access roads that haul material, but other sites with industrial activities or moving around, loading and unloading of wood products, wood chips, etc., have dust generation as well. So while most of the time it's sector J, it can apply to everybody. We have determined that chloride doesn't need a outside approval. So the SWP template will be updated to remove that. But if you're using calcium chloride, at times, try to tell us the volume that you're using if you know it in this next section. But we recommend whenever possible that you just use water to control dust. Any questions about dust?
Actually, I will note, the language is a little bit off here. So, any sort of polymer additives, you will need, a pre-approval for those.
Oh, this
Any
one didn't
chemical
get
additives, yeah,
this one didn't get the not.
right.
This should say not. The next section above had not added. So when we'll revise this to say something about chloride and add that not back in.
Mostly looking towards like flocculants and other chemical additives like that. Those require pre-approval based on the receiving water and whether or not it's impaired and the volumes. Whereas chloride is an allowed use.
Yeah, we do have a form. If you're using something other than chloride or water, I can send that to you. So this next section is just about control measure selection and design. And it notes that you have to consider this. It's not saying you have to do it. It's just saying you have to consider these practices. And then you just go through and if you're not considering them, tell us why it's not something that your facility is considering. And this is just language right out of the permit that says you must consider it. And then this one asks why you're not considering it. This one asks, well, if you're not considering it, then what are you doing? What additional measures does the site utilize? Any questions so far? This next section is new and is in response to some of the major flooding that Vermont has seen over the past few years. It's just saying that these are some considerations for flood mitigation. And so it says that you have to consider implementing them in areas that may be or have previously experienced a major flood event. If you are outside of the flood zone or you've never been subject to a flooding event, you can say it here. A lot of people have said, but if that were to happen, we would consider the above. This section asks about vehicle washing. So this is where vehicle wash water, it cannot be discharged from the site and reach a water of the state. It's an unauthorized stormwater discharge. So any vehicle washing needs to be maintained on site. And it just is asking what your process is for vehicle washing. Some people wash inside only. Some people, wash next to a grassy area and it dissipates on site. Just giving more details on the site's vehicle washing. If there is no vehicle washing, you can say that there. Any questions about flood or vehicle washing? Section 3.2 is about effluent limitations. And so those were identified above. So mine dewatering, wet decking, there's a bunch of them that I haven't said, but that may apply to certain sites, but you're asked that at the beginning of the SWPPP as well as in the application. So you would know if you have some of those, but Sector A is discharging from wet decking. Sector C is runoff from fertilizer manufacturing facilities that comes into contact with raw materials, runoff from asphalt plants, runoff from material storage areas at cement manufacturing, mine dewatering, and then runoff from hazardous waste or non-hazardous waste landfills, runoff from coal storage piles at steam electric generating facilities, and then for airports, runoff from de-icing at existing primary airports. So those are the effluent triggers. If you have any of those, you would say in this next section how you're meeting, what you're doing on site to meet those.
Actually, I dropped part 8
Thank
in
you.
there as well. If you want to show them like Sector A, how to find it, part 8.
Oh, yeah, I have part 8 open, right? It's going dark. So part 8, on our website, we have part 8 specifically called out and it's in its own section, so it's easier to find. But so Sector A, if you were a timber products facility, this is also a good thing to see is it talks about, these are some prohibited discharges. It talks about authorized non-stormwater discharges. It talks about good housekeeping. Here, it talks about some additional requirements that that the SWIP requires. So a drainage site area map, an inventory of exposed materials. And so these are the monitoring tables, and this will come into play also later in the SWIP, because you'll have to write some of these in. So this first table in any of the sectors, if there's a first table, it's typically the discharge monitoring. So that's the quarterly, we call it benchmark monitoring. So the facility is required every quarter to attempt to get a sample from every outfall and send it to a qualified lab to monitor for the parameters specified in the table. So if you're a general sawmill, you have chemical oxygen demands, or COD, you have TSS, and you have total recoverable zinc, which is hardness dependent. I think a lot of people who had questions on that already resolved it with me. If you don't know the hardness or you can't get the hardness when you submit the application, you just put 0 for now. And then as you go further, the next table talks about the effluent limitations, and then it'll tell you what you're required to monitor for. Effluent is an annual requirement. So once a year, you're required to monitor that discharge for pH and woody debris. So at all times, no discharge of debris that would pass through a 1-inch round opening shall leave the site. So that's where you would just tell us what you're doing to comply with that. If you had the woody debris and you installed a pipe that would, or a filter that would stop those woody debris that don't meet the requirement, you could put that there. I went too far now. Most sectors have non-effluent limitations. So this is where you would just describe any of your control measures to make sure that any discharges are within those limits. Like filters, anything that the site does to control the discharges that are coming from the site. This next section applies only to Sector J and asks about mine dewatering. So if you're a Sector J facility and you have mine dewatering, this is where you describe what you do for dewatering. Do you just dewater clear water from one pond to another? Do you dewater it from a pond off-site into a vegetated area? Do you have sediment bags to pump? Do you have pumps? Anything that you have, we want to know how your dewatering works at your site. Because the permit requires that you're dewatering clean water, not dirty, muddy water. So you have to have control measures and practices to only discharge clean water. Any questions about mine dewatering or effluent and sector monitoring? Section 4 is about schedules and procedures for the site. Again, the instructions really have some good ideas of what to use in the next section. Clean up spills promptly, use drip pans, use spill overflow protection. Label containers is a really big one. Develop training procedures, use spill kits, and then the proper make sure that everyone on site knows about the proper notification practices if a spill were to occur. So in this first section, it's just asking, do you have any structural or controls or procedures that are used to prevent leaks and spills? So if you have spill kits, if you use drip pans, if you do all of the draining of vehicles indoors and store all used oil, gasoline, etc. inside, that's all things that you would say here. And so if a spill were to occur, it would stay inside. And then, unless it's not applicable at your site, these are the things that you have to implement for spill protection and prevention. Cleanup. You just check acknowledging that you're implementing them. And if not, you say, and then here you just say what's in addition to the above requirements, what's in your own words, what is the facility's procedure for preventing and responding to spills? And then it's asked for you to provide the locations of any control measures that you have to support. The next section is just the notification process. You're required to notify us as soon as reasonably possible, within 24 hours, I believe. And this is, the Waste Management Division is the one who takes those calls. So they're open during normal business hours. They have an 800 number outside of normal business hours. And then if there's a spill with a potential impact to surface water, you also have to contact the Natural Response Center. And we have their phone numbers updated and available right in the SWPPP template for you. Any questions about spill and spill management? Promise, we're getting there. This next section is just about employee training. So one of the biggest elements of making sure that the site is ran properly and everyone's on board and knows the SWPPP and the requirements is employee training, and making sure that employees are trained within a reasonable time of hire and also at a reasonable interval during the year, at least once a year, a refresher course. So we're asking just what's the content of your training, what's the frequency and schedule, who's responsible for it, development of it. And then we say that the 2025 MSGP requires people to be trained. And then these are some of the things that we recommend you include in your trainings. And then in the next section, it's just, we want to know what you do include out. Even if you retype some of these things, we want to know in your own words, how often do you do it for people who have been employees, when do you train new employees, and what does that training look like? So that is the section to talk about employee training. Any questions about employee training? Oh. So routine facility inspections is a requirement of the permit for everybody. When you get your authorization, it will have more details about those requirements and what they should look like. It's also found within the permit. But this is just saying, what does a routine inspection of this facility look like for you? What do you look at? Where do you look? How often? Just describe the procedure. And then we are asking who's there, who's responsible for it, how often do you do it. Some sectors have an increased frequency requirement and some have quarterly. Quarterly is the minimum, is the max, like you have to do it at least quarterly, but some have a monthly requirement, and that would be found in that sector specific part 8 that Tom sent around. So you find your sector and it will tell you your requirement of how often. Sites that have construction activities have some weekly requirements. So you would talk about site-wide your inspections. All the areas that have industrial activities or exposed to stormwater, which is would be outlined above as well. And then anything that is a potential pollutant source would go in this next section. And then any areas where leaks and spills have occurred in the last 3 years, you would list here. If there's none, that's where you would say that. And then your outfall, or this says discharge, but really it means outfall that you've identified above for those coordinates here, and describe the discharge points, like at the end of the access road, these are the coordinates. And if there's any safety consideration, so I have heard some feedback that, well, runoff, my outfall is way down here, but it's in the winter time or during mud season, it's not safe to get there. And so you would say that here. And then if you have effluent, you would just reiterate your control measures here. And then anything else that the facility covers that may not be mentioned above. Any questions about routine facility inspections? There's also a requirement for quarterly visual inspections of stormwater discharges. So this procedure is similar to what people may be used to for discharge monitoring reports, where you collect a sample, send it to the lab, they send you back results, and you report it back. This is just a visual assessment. So you collect it in a clear colorless glass or plastic container and examine it in a well-lit area. You look for signs of oil, dust, dirt, things like that. And you have to do that every quarter. If you could then send that same result to the lab for monitoring, or to meet your monitoring. So this is just going to ask you those same questions that it asked you above, but it's gonna ask them about the visual inspection. So, what I just kind of went over what the permit says about what you do for a visual inspection. So you would say, in, your own words, what the facility does here, who's going to do it, how often, doesn't always know, at least quarterly, by the end of the year, by the end of the quarter. So what equipment are you using, the outfall, and how are you documenting it goes in this next section. So if you have mason jars that you use, or whatever you use, just this is the area to talk about the site-specific visual assessment procedures. Any questions about visual monitoring? This next section is just for inactive and unstaffed facilities. So when your facility is inactive and unstaffed and you've notified us via your discharge monitoring report, which is not available yet, but it's very close to being completed. So when that's available, we will send it out to people who have issued stormwater permits, and that's how you'll report the data from your discharge monitoring. But facilities who are inactive and unstaffed for an entire quarter are exempt from those requirements. So this section just says if you're invoking that right, that status, tell us here. And it says include information to support the claim, which would be it's winter time. We have no one there. We're closed for 2 years because of X, Y, and Z. Like anything goes really, just why the site is inactive and unstaffed. Any questions about inactive and unstaffed facilities? So the monitoring section is the section that I think also a lot of times is missed or not filled out properly. So this section talks about benchmark, which is the quarterly, which you can find in that table, which we'll go back to. The effluent, which is annually, if you have one of those triggering activities. And then other monitoring required by Vermont. Most people are not going to have that. We don't have anybody who we've required additional monitoring outside of what's in the permit. So this one is just there for if we needed it, but it's not used right now. So this just tells you the instructions of what we're looking for in that section. But essentially, most people are just going to have benchmark. So you just make sure that you check it off. And then for each monitoring section, we have the drop down. So it includes each outfall, the parameters that you're required to sample, the schedules, things like that. So this is a drop down in monitoring type. So if you select which one, so typically it's quarterly, and then the sample location, it's a description of where it is. So end of access road, stormwater pond outfall, etc. The outfall number would match what you've previously designated for the outfall number. And then the pollutants to be sampled are the ones that are found in this table. That's when you go back up to this table. So if you were SIC 2491, you'd have total recoverable arsenic and total recoverable copper. So you would put these two parameters And their limit set, which is here, 0.15 milligrams per liter is the limit. But if you go over that, it's not a permit violation. That's just what is designated by EPA as the cutoff concentration. So you would put those pollutants here. The monitoring schedule is, at least quarterly during a rainstorm that meets the requirements of the permit. The numeric limitations is this number. If it's a hardness dependent value, you would then take your hardness value and go down here to the table and find your value. And then, so if you were 0 to 4.99, your value for zinc is 0.04. So you would use that value here. And then your procedures is just, how do you collect that sample? Do you have to climb up Mount Everest to get it? What do you have to do? What's your procedure for there? And we're really looking for each outfall to be listed separately because the sample location is going to be the same. So even if the parameters are the same, we're really looking for you to select each one separately and tell us that it's quarterly, the sample location, the outfall number, and just repeat until you have all of your outfalls in there. And so if you have if you have one outfall, but you have quarterly and you have the effluent, you could repeat the information above there, but you would just here, you would put the numeric limits of pH and the woody debris if you were sector A. Any questions about monitoring? All right. This is something that's not typically done, but this is substantially identical discharge points. So if you had a discharge point that, if you had 4 discharge points, but you say that 2 of them are basically the same, even then you could designate them as substantially identical to only have to monitor for, that as one outfall. And you would list each of them and the general industrial activities that happen in that drainage area and the control measures for each drainage discharge point. This section is not typically used, but is available if there is that need. And that goes all the way down. All these questions are in relation to substantially identical outfalls. Any questions about substantially identical outfalls? We are almost done. So this section is really just a repeat of what we asked on the NOI. The SWP is intended to be a cohesive document for the facility's use. That's why some things may seem repetitive, like why do we ask it on the NOI and on the SWP? The intention of the SWP is to be a comprehensive, cohesive document for the facility to keep on site so everyone knows the expectations. And the NOI is meant for, this is what we're doing when we're applying. So they have different purposes, even though some of the questions do seem repetitive and you have to answer them in multiple different places. But it was the only way that we could meet our requirements. And then a new thing, this permit cycle is for reapplications. If you're operating in the footprint of your previously approved SWP and your activities have not changed, you don't need to obtain a new determination from Fish and Wildlife. So if you have rare, threatened, endangered species in your project's vicinity, but you have a previous determination, you don't have to get that again because you're not changing anything. So that was really helpful for a lot of facilities.
What criterion actually?
I'm pretty sure that's criterion E. If you have a previous A's, off the top of my head, A is you don't have any. And then B through E are you do, but you may have consultation. B, C, and D have some sort of consultation. I think E is you're certifying that your activities are not going to affect those rare, threatened, and endangered. So typically we see E and A. But if you wanted to say you have a previous determination that we use criterion B, you can use the same criterion because the reasonings for each criterion didn't change from the permit cycle. So you could use your previous determination and criterion that you used. Any questions about rare, threatened, and endangered species? This is another one that gets missed a lot. It's just about National Historic Preservation and if you have any protected properties. I feel like that's something people typically know. So you can just, if you don't have any, just say none. If you do, you can insert documentation or text of how you're complying with that act. Any questions on historic preservation? And the second to last section is just corrective actions. This section is asking if you have anything outside of what we list below. So we'll scroll down, but we've listed what is required of the permit below. Some people have their own corrective actions. So if you have additional practices or procedures that you use for corrective action, you can put them here. If you don't, you can just say that you will comply with the corrective action as outlined below. Spelled wrong. So this is just the corrective action for everyone to review. It tells you what to do if you determine if actions are needed. It has a section about benchmark exceedances. If you exceed once, what you need to do. If you exceed again, what you need to do. And again, that's just standard language for everyone. So that's why it's in the permit and in the SWP. And then the last section is just any additional information that you either want to give. There wasn't a section to give. You can put here some sectors have sector specific. They might have something that says also in your SWP address this. And it might not be standard for everyone. So this would be the section for you to address anything that is outside of the general information that we have asked for above. And then you just sign it. When you download this form, I think that's something I didn't make very clear. When you actually download this form and then save it to your computer, this signature field becomes an actual signature field instead of having to print it out and sign it. So if you like saved it to your computer and then opened it, when you're going through it, this field will have a red box where you can sign it electronically, but you don't have to. And that is a SWP template. Does anybody have any questions or want to see anything again or more information about anything? Anything in the chat?
No.
Okay. All right, well, if nobody has questions, then we'll give you,
Oh.
okay. See if, Craig, you're good at unmuting, so let's see if you can do it.
No, you got it.
No, he did it last time. I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, is there a way, could you post, a complete, like without giving the company's name or anything? Could you post one that you have approved and accepted so we could use that as a guide?
I don't know about post, but we could probably send it to you because it is a public record.
Yeah, they're all public records, so we can definitely send you one.
Cause
I see Craig. I got you two Craigs confused on my invitation, so sorry. I can send it
Yeah,
to
no,
both
that's
of
all right.
you. I can send
Yeah.
you both I think one of you is wood preserving and one of you is Craig Owen is sector A.
Okay.
You're sector J,
right.
right?
I was just saying, because sometimes at least we looked at some of it and we didn't know how to start, so, I mean, what we did today was very helpful, but if there's a way to just white out the name and say, this is kind of what we're looking for, we can adjust from that. It would at least be helpful for us anyway.
Yeah, they're public record, and I think that's important to note is, anything that comes to us is a public record. It's put on what we call the environmental notice bulletin. It's on there now. It's up for public review. We don't white out the company names. So I can definitely send you, Craig, a sector J, and Craig Owen, I can send you a sector A. And if there's anyone else in here who wants one specific to their activity, feel free to shoot me an email and I'm happy. We definitely have some that were done by engineers that we talked about potentially sharing today, but decided to just go through it step by step of what, giving more information about what we are looking for in it. But I do think that seeing something, especially done by an engineer, is super helpful to get a better idea of what other sites are doing and saying. So I'm happy to send that to you.
That's great. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Craig Owen said he's for that.
Yeah, sector A.
Yeah,
I remember that.
no watering, no dewatering.
Okay.
And then Cheryl asked you to go over the general location map and how do we find that? 1.5. I think she's asking to go through the general location map again.
Okay, yeah, definitely.
Cheryl, if you want to type in your address, maybe Ashley can walk right through that with your address and show you how to create it for your address.
And I can show, so on our stormwater main site, which we can put in the chat, we have our industrial, we have our pretty pictures, and we have our industrial permitting page. And so this is gonna have all of your resources right on it. I try to take some old stuff off and rearrange it so it's a little bit easier to find. So we have the full permit here, which is signed by our previous director, and then we've split out. So this is the general requirements, sector specific requirements, which is where you're going to find those tables that we were talking about. Appendices has definitions and standard permit conditions. Appendix D has like the SIC codes and everything that's covered. And then, the response to comments, if you were interested in knowing what public comments we received and how we responded.
You're not sharing the screen.
Oh,
You know what? You're not sharing your screen. While you're doing that, maybe you start the location map for her.
you can put the address in
Yeah,
there?
the address in there, and then while that's loading, you can go through the rest of that.
Sharing the window.
I think
You're
so.
sharing your SWPPP template.
Yeah.
Now? No. Let's do this for a second and then see if I can find. Okay, sorry about that. This is better. So this is our general website where you can find the first.
Start the location
Yeah.
map, show me. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to go over this again because I wasn't sharing my screen. So you can go, you can find all those links that we sent, and then also down here, you can find the SWIP template. You can find this site map checklist. So I know it's in the SWIP template, but sometimes when you're working on it outside the SWIP, it might be harder to check back. So Bryce created this site map checklist, which has all of those links that are in the SWIP that have to be included on your site map here. And then this next link is there's a location map generator. So you click on that. Like I said, for you, it's going to have a warning. I wish I could go back and reverse my choices, but I can't. So it's gonna say like, using this, these are the steps. Note it takes time, be patient. And then you say, okay, and it brings up here.
1249 Pitt Road, Stockbridge, Vermont.
Pitt Road,
Pitt.
Pitt
Yeah,
Road. Stockbridge.
Stockbridge.
And so then as you're typing, luckily it knows if you're located. It helps you fill in your location. So then you would click on that. So it's gonna bring up this map. So the key will tell you in the end what each of these mean, but this means there's a rare and endangered species there. I believe these are wetlands. So then you go up to this print map. And you can rename it whatever you want to here. You can name it your site location, your permit number, whatever you want. And then you just hit print. And then maybe go get some coffee or something, because sometimes it takes a little bit. But the results, you can see it spinning. Because it's developing that map for you. And then when it does, you'll see a 1 there, and then we can open it and look at what that site map looks. And I can show you kind of the key, if you're interested in knowing, what the key means and what the colors mean on your map. But just generating this map from this link and saving it and then sending it to me or whomever sent you the comments is going to automatically meet their minimum requirements of the location map. So you don't have to you used to have to go and turn on all the layers yourself and make sure they are on. But this was a development to just have a one-stop shop that all you have to do is type in your address and the map shows you exactly what we need to know. So it takes kind of like that guessing game out of that. And usually pretty close. Now it starts to. And this is something it tells you on that first page is it may take a few minutes to produce the map. So just hang tight and it'll let you know when it's done. And you don't have to stay on this page. You can go do something else and leave the tab open and then come back to it.
Well, that's running. Actually, there's another comment. We don't have any specific, from Emily. We don't have any specific discharge points on site. Should we use the body of water it flows to? My site, the stormwater flows to the lake next to the site, but there isn't any specific points that all water from the site flows to.
Yes. You read it again?
Sure. We don't have any specific discharge points on the site. Should we use the body of water it flows to? For my site, the stormwater flows to the lake next to the site, but there isn't any specific points that all water from the site flows to.
Yeah, so the outfalls are every place on the site that stormwater could leave to reach that lake. Is that what you're asking? So like the low points of your site. I always use gravel beds because they're the easiest one for me to make sense. It's typically access roads on gravel pits slope up, and then a gravel pit in itself is a bowl and doesn't typically discharge. Sometimes there are discharges from dewatering or in the exploration phases, things like that, but the access road itself, like at the lowest point, is where you would identify that outfall, because that's where stormwater would leave the site and potentially reach a water of the state. That answer your question? Okay. Let me know if it doesn't answer your question. Okay, so now we're back to the map. And you can see that it says a result here. So we're going to click on this tab, and whatever you name the map, it'll show here. So this is the map for that site. So you can see there's a tributary running down that leads right to the White River. This red is saying that there's a rare, threatened, endangered animal in this vicinity, but again, this is a reapplication, so it's not something that you have to reach out to Fish and Wildlife about. If this was a new application, you would have to reach out to Fish and Wildlife. But because it's a reapplication, that step has already been completed. And then sometimes the colors are, so like this is showing there's a class 2 wetland here. These are potentially more animal. So this map includes everything that we would need, and then you would just hit save. And then wherever, you want to save it. Save. Then it's going to come up here when it's saved. You can hit open file from there or from wherever you saved it. And then whenever you send it back to me or whomever sent the comments, you can just send this and we can recognize that it's right from our map generator and will meet the requirements of the permit.
So there's a follow-up on the discharge point question.
Okay.
Actually, I think from somebody getting ready. Site is mostly impervious surface and the contours show that the site slopes right to the lake. However, there doesn't seem to be any low spots. Should I use multiple points along the lake that the water flows to?
I think maybe reach out to me separately, because without, I don't, every site is different, but yeah, I think any point where stormwater leaves the site needs to be identified as an outfall. And if you don't believe that you have those, then that's a discussion that we should have. Any other questions about anything that we went over today? Yeah, definitely, Emily, email me. Even if I wasn't the one to send you comments, you can always email me. We kind of split things up when we were crazy because we had lots of applications and it's a lot for one person to handle. So my amazing team helped, but now we're, down with that first intake. And so if you have questions, you're definitely welcome to reach out to me directly. If you've already received comments, I won't know what the comments mean because I didn't send them, but I can answer questions for sure. I'll give one last call for anyone questions. I will note we're working on the SWIP template, recognize that some things are funky and repetitive, and I heard the feedback loud and clear, and we are working on it. We just don't have anything available right now. So the template that we have is the one that we're still asking people to use. Awesome. Well, yeah, the 60 days, as long as you're reaching out to me or whomever sent you the comments, we will completely work with you. The 60 days is really there to, if we send comments and you just forget about us for 5 years, to kind of prevent that from happening. But otherwise, yes, just, I think a lot of you, I recognize your name, so I've been working with you, and I know that you're working on it, and it'll be, yeah, that's what we're here for, is to work with you.
Thank you very
Tom
much.
and I are always available if I'm not here. I'm not usually here Fridays, afternoons, so, Tom and I are available for any questions outside of this that you didn't want to ask or came up with after you either watch, if you want to rewatch it, or you just come up with questions afterwards, feel free to reach out. Do you have something? I talked over you. Thank you all for coming. This was a great show up, and I'm really happy that everyone came. And again, reach out if you have any additional questions. We are here to support you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley.
Guys, have a good day.
All right.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Maybe